So the astrologers failed. If they were planning to make a trick upon the scientifically minded Jawaharlal Nehru, it did not work. But other prime ministers of India have been seriously entrenched in superstition. I have a statement of Narendra Modi made some years back at a science congress. I think he was inaugurating it. And he explained there the importance of science and technology by stressing that this has a deep-rooted place in Indian polity. I would not say that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is ignorant of all these kind of things. He is well aware about all these kind of things. But to my understanding, as a political science student, he would be seeing or understanding a political support base that he has from those people who would cherish the past of India. Narendra Modi has been photographed in a cave in saffron clothes during the last election. He has been making arati in river Ganges, and he has been taking holy dip during the Kumbh Mela. So these are ritualistic, very closely connected with superstitious beliefs. I were in his position, I would not do such a thing. I would stand very clearly with my commitment. I would not work under any political compulsions. But politicians are under compulsions. It's a ground reality. That is unethical. It's wrong. And if it is done by Sonia Gandhi, it's wrong. If it's done by Narendra Modi, it's wrong. If it's done by former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, anybody does, it's wrong.
I would like to welcome everybody who is present in the Clubhouse, YouTube, as well as our Zoom. We have been conducting these conferences for quite a few years now, and I appreciate you all joining us to this meeting. Please note that in this session, all the three platforms would be going on together. So we would be taking questions and we would be taking questions from all the three platforms. I would just request everybody to keep your videos and audios off for the recording purposes. And when you're asking a question, you can turn on both the things. So the topic for today that we have, science, technology, and Narendra Modi. Superstition is rampant when it comes to a country like India. But what is superstition? And from breaking mirrors to hanging lemon and chilies, India is a country of diverse culture and tradition, as well as of a lot of superstitions. We see them all around every day. A black cat crosses our path, and like a dead statue, we stop and wait for someone else to pass first. The best part about the country is that we continue to practice even when we know that nothing is going to happen. When we see the current situation, PM has taken a position where he says superstition is not supported. It is said to be dangerous to people, and that science and technology is the solution. This is also something a rationalist would say, and so one should appreciate when anybody, be it Narendra Modi, takes a right step towards the future. It is a relief indeed, and I would be really happy to welcome Sanal sir with us so that he can talk more about this. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Shubhi. Thank you, everybody. When we speak about the Indian Prime Minister speaking in favor of science and technology, and not only in favor of science and technology, but against superstition, one would be a bit surprised. One is very sure that anybody who heads a government like India would be practicing the principles of science and technology in all matters that is counted in everything that is in real politics or in a real economy or real scientific field. One would follow the scientific method, the scientific attitude and scientific principles, and science and technology becomes a very effective and convenient tool for anybody in power. And nobody who would be leading a country like India to this stature, to this size, and to this kind of political power would ignore science and technology. But to speak for science and technology and actually using science and technology are two different things. Most of us, even those people who very strongly oppose the rationalist movement or defend superstition, we see that they use science and technology in their day-to-day life to the fullest extent possible. Imagine the person who speaks in defense of superstition or promoting superstition using all tools of modern technology and everything that is connected with the scientific understanding to promote his blind belief and superstitions. Look at the Indian gurus. They use not only scientific method to propagate their blind belief and superstition, but also their infrastructure, their communication system. Everything is using science and technology to the fullest possible way, and they make use of it to their benefit, even to promote blind belief and superstition. And that is why this becomes important when a Prime Minister of India, especially when there is a general feeling that many people in this government or who have proximity to this government would be very happily willing to take India backward to the Middle Ages. That's the kind of feeling that many people keep very clearly. And I mean, to an extent, there are sufficient reasons to see these doubts have some kind of meaning. But look at we speak about the Indian situation in general. There is no doubt that India is deeply drenched into superstition. India is one of the most superstitious countries in the world in many people's eyes. But of course, India is superstitious. That doesn't mean that India is the only country that is superstitious. You can see similar superstitions or equal amount of superstition in neighboring countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, but not only South Asian countries, but also in many parts of Europe. The kind of superstitions that people follow in many parts of India, for example, or in Latin America, or in Africa, are slightly different than the kind of superstition that exists in the developed part of the world, or where people have rejected the traditional belief. For example, I know one minor superstition which is very prevalent, which I've seen in Poland. In Poland, when two people fall in love, they go to a bridge and they go with a small lock and they click it on the wall of the, if it has rails, if it has small wires, they will click it on there and lock it and throw the key to the water. The general belief that this couple have, that is locking their relationship, and since the key is gone, that is stabilizing their relationship. A lot of people do it with a pinch of fun also. And I don't know how many people seriously believe it, but many people consider this an interesting thing that they have to do when they fall in love. And I've seen many small bridges making signboards that people should not, make their locks click there, because that will damage with the heavy weight. And the keys thrown down sometimes can be very, very big quantity that could cause problems of the river also. Why should people believe in such things? So there is a tendency amongst many people to believe in something that would give a kind of an imaginative satisfaction, that their wishes would fulfill the way they want it, and nothing would happen. And they would like to feel ensured about that. But beyond that, the people, for example, who would look at the astrology columns in newspapers, there are still people in the United States, I know, who would follow the astrology columns in the newspapers. But if you ask if they really believe it or do you follow it, well, many of them are not actually following it, but they would just read it out of curiosity, for a little fun, and nothing more than that. But when superstition is something affecting your day-to-day life, taking you to the extreme point of fear, there is something that's very, very serious. And what happens in countries like India is something that we all know. Most of Indians who are deeply entrenched in superstitions are living in fear. The fear of the supernatural, fear of the demons, fear of the spirits around them, fear of the auspicious time and the bad time, fear of omens, fear of everything around they consider are conspiring against them. The natural forces are all conspiring against them. Everything is dangerous and they have to get some kind of protection from all these kind of evil spirits and evil moments and bad times and good times and whatnot. Everything is dangerous. And people try to overcome this, not by understanding the mechanism, but by going to people who would promise that they have a solution to the crisis. The people, the merchants of fear, they are the keepers of superstition industry in a country like India. What's the size of Indian superstition? Frontline magazine has published an article some years back evaluating the depth of superstition in urban cities in different parts of India. They have made sample surveys in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Calcutta, and many other cities, and came out with one whole issue. And the issue, they made a cover story which had a heading, the Superstition Empire. They identified this as an empire of witchcraft, of astrology, of a lot of other things that would be completely haunting the common sense of the people. But what's the size of it? That's the question we have been pondering into. The superstition industry is a multi-billion business in India. A multi-billion business in the sense that some of the small superstitions that we consider not that important, if you go deep into that, you would see the size of it, the kind of depth that it has entrenched in the life of people. One good example I tell you. You know that in most of the cities, people who are superstitious believe that Saturn is bad for them. Shani, they call it. The planet Saturn, I mean, in their eye, is an evil spirit that's set there to destroy you and make trouble for you. But this mighty Saturn is afraid of a small instrument, a magical instrument, which would include 2 chilies and 1 lemon. So one would make stitch 2 chilies and 1 lemon and hang in front of your door. And they believe that Shani Maharaj or the King Saturn would be warded off because of that. It looks like a silly superstition at a lower level. But remember, every day, every Friday night, not every day, every Friday night, something like 27 full trucks of lemon and chili stitched together are moving to India's capital, Delhi. Imagine that. All these truckful loads of lemon and chili stitched together are produced in several farms in India and in several other places who found this as a lucrative market. 2 chilies and a lemon would normally cost a small amount of money only, but it will be sold at a very, very high price. I mean, 10 years back or 15 years back, I remember I've asked one of these guys, who've been selling it. He said he would charge 25 rupees for 2 chilies and 1 lemon. That looks like a small amount for many people, but now it could have still gone up. And you don't have to ask for it. Somebody will come early morning on Saturday and hang it in front of your door. You're afraid to take it off. And after 4 days, 4 weeks, the guy will come with a small bill of 4 times protecting you from Shani Maharaj, the great evil king Shani at that time. And you would give 100 rupees to him. For Saturdays, you have been protected. You don't want to, you may think that it's a silly superstition, but still you are afraid because every house you see this instrument, this protection instrument is hanging. So you pay the money. And this is a huge business which runs into millions. In all Indian cities, truckloads are coming on every Friday night with the stitched lemon and chilies. Such a small thing we consider, but it's a big business for many people. And how vulnerable the Indian population is for this superstition. You know that the midnight advertisements in the televisions, which are actually, illegal in a way, because they give wrong promises and absolutely fraudulent claims they make, and they would sell a small, for example, a glass Ganesh or Lakshmi. Ganesh is the god that would stop you which will remove all obstructions in your life, and Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth. And if you have the Lakshmi of little glass, which could cost a rupee, would be sold for 2,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees because you give a value added, the technical term for market, value added image of it by claiming that there have been 2,000 Brahmin priests chanting mantras and enhance the capacity of this to protect you from all troubles or give you wealth. And you would online, you make an order, and they're making multi-billion business every night. This is happening. I mean, not only in India, in many other countries, these kind of things really do happen. Why do people go for that? I don't want to reduce the importance of the greater superstitions, but these are all symbols of how our society is deeply entrenched in superstition. But who are these people who are superstitious? Many people would say the illiterate people, they are not educated, therefore they are superstitious. No, it's not correct. I have been working in the field of superstition for several decades. I've closely watched and analyzed and tried to understand the mechanism of superstition as it works in India. And I have a very clear understanding it transcends the urban-rural divide. It transcends the rich and poor divide. It transcends the hierarchy of caste. The kind of superstition that people have is not limited to these kind of small superstitions that you are putting some stuff in front of your home on a Saturday, or you are afraid about some auspicious time, but people are seriously affected by superstition when they think that their day-to-day life is to be controlled by, for example, the stars or the planets, as they call it. And many of the Indians, 53% is one of the evaluation, one survey made by Trinity College shows that more than 53% of the Indians believe in astrology, some kind of auspicious time or inauspicious time. And they would look, if they want to marry somebody, if the horoscopes are matching each other. And if the horoscopes are not matching, they would go away from a marriage proposal, though the couple may be liking each other, or maybe everything is otherwise perfect. So the fundamental crux of the fear is that you are haunted by demons, by spirits, by the stars, and by everything that is around you are really, really cornering you with the different mechanisms that you don't have any control on. So when people are living in this kind of fear, everything that you see around is attributing to it and contributing to it. The newspapers would publish stories and stories about the auspicious times and inauspicious times, about the kind of blind beliefs that somebody would follow, giving credence and more acceptance to that. And also, you know that many people who are uncertain about their life are quite vulnerable to deep superstitions. Look at the very prominent superstitious people. Some of the cricket stars are very superstitious. Some of the film actors are very superstitious. And some of the politicians are very superstitious. Mainly because they feel that their positions are so uncertain and they cannot control their remaining there at the top for a long time by themselves. They think that they need some external support, which they think are magical. You have seen politicians in every country using methods of superstition because they feel uncertain about themselves. Several chief prime ministers of Sri Lanka have been regularly visiting some astrologers in Kerala. Every time that's in news. Even the overthrown Prime Minister Rajapakse has been visiting a small village in Kerala where he believed some astrologer could decide all about handling the obstacles that his political power is infected with. So he would pay some money, allow some magician to do some magical words to be chanted, and he would do certain rituals, and he would believe that everything is perfect for him. From this level of superstition to minor superstitions, a person who otherwise is not superstitious, like Barack Obama, he himself has once said that he would keep a small charm in his pocket because he thinks that it could protect him. It was in the lighter vein, but at the end of the day, it gives an impression that a superstition has an influence on the most powerful political seat of the world. When politicians are superstitious, when public persons are superstitious, that has a direct impact on people. But more than that, it can make serious political blunders. There are stories and stories about superstitions properly used to counter political leaders. For example, if a politician believes that a certain omen is bad, one could artificially create it. I was told about a story about the lifting of emergency in India. Indira Gandhi, though was very, scientifically thinking, at one side, she had a darker side. The second part of her power, or especially at the last part of her, the first regime, during emergency, everybody was, mistrusted all around, and she had a permanent fear that her enemies were doing black magic against her. Jayant Pupulkar, one of her close friends, has written a book about Indira Gandhi and her superstitions, especially in the latter part of her life. She would always imagine that demons were, terrorizing her. She would believe that somebody is doing witchcraft against her. And before lifting emergency, she consulted astrologers and got an advice that was the most auspicious time to withdraw it or to declare election, that she would be elected very clearly without any hindrance. Well, other side of the story is the astrologers were paid by the opposition, and they could influence the appropriate astrologer to give the wrong advice so that they could finally see the possibility of an election during the dark days of emergency. There is another famous story which many people used to write about, is about the Declaration of Independence of India, the 1947 midnight event. Some people have written that the time was decided by some astrologer by tricking Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru did not believe in astrology or any of these superstitions. But some of the colleagues were seriously believing in astrology, and an auspicious time was decided. That was the midnight of 14th, when 1947, August 15th, when the dawn begins at the midnight, India was declared an independent nation. Was it decided by an astrologer? During Nehru's time, this issue was raised. Nehru said he never knew about such a thing. But it is discussed in many forums that some of the colleagues of Nehru wanted to have this special time, and they got this approved by the then Viceroy without even the knowledge of Nehru, because they thought that would be good for India, and that would be a peaceful years for India's launching as an independent nation. And there won't be any threat coming from external powers in the initial launching of India. But you know what happened? It's very, very clear. Though they tricked Nehru to get into this astrologically auspicious time, the birth of India was one of the most catastrophical in human history. There were huge violence between Hindus and Muslims, and people were still trying to go to the newly established Pakistan or the newly established India from the other side. And millions of people were displaced, and several hundreds of thousands of people were killed even after this. Still, despite this astrological decision of the time, if it was correct, India faced a war in 1948 with Pakistan and lost a major chunk of the Kashmir territory, which is still an issue of dispute between India and Pakistan. So the astrologers failed. If they were planning to make a trick upon the scientifically minded Jawaharlal Nehru, it did not work. But other prime ministers of India have been seriously entrenched in superstition. Deva Gowda, for example. Deva Gowda, when he was becoming the prime minister of India, it was well known at that time, he believed in Vastu. He wanted a huge makeover of the prime minister's bungalow by shifting the entrance from one side to the other and moving the toilet from one side to the other. And a huge amount was built to the exchequer, to the government, because he wanted certain changes as per the astrologer's advice or the Vastu astrologer's advice. With all these things, he wanted to ensure that he would remain in power for long. That's the only thing he could not make. He did not remain in power for long. He lost the power in a few years, in a few months, in fact. So what one would primarily see in these kind of superstitions that political leaders would follow, it makes a clearly absurd situation in two different dimensions. Number one, when they make wrong decisions on behalf of the people by the advice of not experts but astrologers or Vastu experts or some kind of soothsayer, they can certainly make wrong decisions, number one, and they could be wrongly advised by those people who understand that this decision maker is depending on a soothsayer or astrologer, and one could easily influence them because most of these astrologers are willing to say anything that they want or anything that they wish to tell as against benefits. You know that, marriages in India would not happen without an astrologer's consultation in many, many families. But if a marriage has to happen, even if the horoscopes don't fit, you can always win an astrologer and he would find solutions, or he would try to give astrological explanations how this could be solved. You have to please the astrologer, not please the gods or the evil spirits. That's how it works. This is all well known. Those people who understand the mechanism of superstition and who do not believe in it can misuse superstition of the people in power against the actual interest of the people for their vested interest. That's one of the biggest dangers. Or people who think that these holy men or astrologers have a lot of power can easily become prey, to the people who claims their powers. For example, Swami Sadachari. If you remember, there was one person, namely Swami Sadachari, who was the nephew of Dhirendra Brahmachari, who had a lot of proximity to the Prime Minister's house at one time. He would go to all cabinet ministers and opposition leaders. Practically he went to everybody with a picture of he doing a special puja at the Prime Minister's residence, who was coming to power at that time after the emergency, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Somebody advised Mrs. Gandhi that there should be a puja there so that her power is ensured and she would be safe. So Swami Sadachari was the person who has been doing it. But he took a set of photographs and he went to every sundry politician in the country at that time, shown this picture and won their heart. And he would take pictures with these people when he has a little ceremony with them. And he got enormous political clout. He would do some small tricks, like looking into a heaven and produce fire with his mental power, so-called mental power. He would just look at the heaven with the set of wood. The sandalwood is arranged there, and he would look into that, pour in some purified butter, which we call ghee, and after some minutes, fire will just break up. And that was seen as a great magical power of him. I've seen pictures of him with almost all the top politicians of India of those times with the same trick that he was doing. And we, of course, worked on that, and we found that he was using not purified butter, which is ghee, but purely a chemical, which is known as glycerin. And he used potassium permanganate. He sprinkled that in the sandalwood, and he poured glycerin in the pretext of the purified butter. There's a chemical action between the potassium permanganate, which was sprinkled down earlier, and the glycerin that he poured in instead of ghee, and fire will break out. Imagine this happened in 1977 in almost all cabinet ministers' homes and the opposition leaders' homes. And everywhere Swami Sadachari reached and shown this magic. The Science and Technology Minister I have seen on his feet, I have a photograph of the then Science and Technology Minister on his feet, after not only showing this magic, but also he waving a little paper and getting messages from senior politicians who passed away. A small trick which anybody can do if one knows a little primary knowledge about how chemicals would work. One could write with, for example, citric acid or sulfuric acid on a paper, and it will disappear. And instead of citric acid, one can even use a lemon or a lime. And when it's dried, you don't see anything, but whatever you have written can be put in front of a flame, and when the paper is heated, you would see a red-colored letter appearing there, or dark-colored letters appearing there. A small magic that children would do. But when a holy man in saffron clothes do such a thing, that could simply impress anybody who is vulnerable to superstitions, and many of them were top politicians. This is one way how superstitions work. But on the other side, there are people who made empires with the superstition, and they have influenced the whole political structure with their superstition. You know about the story of Satya Sai Baba. He's a top politician, a top guru in India, who lived in Andhra Pradesh. Puttaparthi was the village, and he got support of whole political community of our country, starting from the ruling party and then opposition, and from the left to the right spectrum, everybody. I have a set of people, list of people who have been visiting Satya Sai Baba. And you have chief ministers at his place. When he had his birthday, interestingly, that was his 80th birthday. It was a huge ceremony. And that ceremony was blessed by the then President of India, Shangadayal Sharma. And Also in the meeting was then Prime Minister of India. We had at that time the President of India, the Prime Minister of India, the Speaker of India, and the State Chief Minister participating in an event of Satya Sai Baba. And during this event, how he makes tricks to influence vulnerable people is very, very well known. He would just move his hand and produce some holy ash. A small trick that anybody can do by keeping a small ball of some kind of ash in his hand and crush it and give to people. I've shown it in hundreds of stages how this is done. But he could simply win a lot of people by showing this small magic. But on that stage, when Indian politicians were there, top Indian politicians were there, he has celebrated the person, the architect who designed the memorial building for Satya Sai Baba's 80th birthday. And he was called to the stage and a plaque was to be given to him. And Sai Baba suddenly produced a golden chain out of thin air, and to everybody's surprise, and handed it over or gave it on the neck of this architect. But the cameraman, at the time India had only one television channel, Doordarshan, which was the official national television channel. And this channel wanted to telecast this show, and that the all times the spools were there and everything was recorded. And the cameraman back in the studio, when he played it in slow motion, he found a very interesting thing. He found that Sai Baba's hands were looking for something under the plaque. Then he watched carefully. Then he looked to the man who brought it to him. And as if, where is it? He makes a small eye gesture, and there is a reflex on the other side showing him the other side. So this is turned and he takes something underneath, and then he made it in slow motion. You could see that he was simply taking out a pasted with with tapes. A small golden chain was taped underneath, and he was just taking it out and shown it to people as if he produced from thin air. This was all very clearly seen in the video clip. He has gone to the television channel's head, the head of the Hyderabad. This was in Hyderabad, I think. And the channel head wanted him to bring it to him to keep it in safe custody, and he would discuss with the Delhi if it could be, relayed. But the cameraman was very clever. He made a very fast VHS copy before handing it over to the channel head. Of course, the channel head very effectively and very, very meticulously planned what is to be done. He destroyed it. So, but there was a copy outside, the VHS copy. This copy was recopied and recopied, and it was in circulation, and I could obtain a copy from this cameraman. Later, this was handed over to Channel 4 television when Channel 4 was making a documentary about our work, the Guru Busters. At the time, this video was handed over to them, and that is shown very clearly. All the grains were removed, and it was shown, though this was stopped in India, this was shown in Guru Busters, the documentary that British television has made and shown in some 27 countries. Later, of course, this was shown by some channels in India as well. So these small tricks are used by fraudulent people who claim that they are representatives of gods or who could influence the destiny of people, and vulnerable politicians go prey of them. And this is one set of superstition that we see at the high realms of power in India from the very, very beginning. After Jawaharlal Nehru's time, we see most of the politicians are going on the lines of superstition. And during Jawaharlal Nehru's time itself, there were people who were very closely associated with superstitious beliefs and superstitious rituals and other practices. But there was another major way of spreading superstition by giving new credence to it or giving it pseudo-scientific justifications. That is what we have been seeing in quite some years. Also, there came some scientists who would give credence to superstitions and give an impression that science sanctions superstitions. Two examples I would like to cite here. One is a former president of India, APJ Abdul Kalam. Abdul Kalam is a person with a lot of integrity, and I have a lot of, I've expressed my respect to him on many grounds that he has been representing in his views, but he was identifying himself with the most of the fraudulent gurus and superstition campaigners. For example, Satya Sai Baba. On Satya Sai Baba's another birthday, the chief guest was the then Indian president, Abdul Kalam. He has not only gone there and blessed the program, but he made a speech along with a poem that he has written. The poem praises Satya Sai Baba to an extent that even a blind believer would be hesitating to do. He said, this globe is so blessed, or this solar system is so blessed to have an earth where a person like Satya Sai Baba is born. And that's the little poem that Abdul Kalam has written and presented on Sai Baba's stage. We have seen top politicians with a lot of gurus and babas and all these kind of people. Nobody is an exception. Indira Gandhi was there with a lot of fraudulent gurus. One of the top most powerful politicians, the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I have a set of pictures of Narendra Modi with many of the Indian fraudulent godmen. And many people who make absolutely baseless claims were supported by the present Prime Minister by his sanctioning their authority with his presence. People like Sri Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar makes claims which cannot be substantiated. But he's taken as a person, as a holy person, who would be associated with the Prime Minister. And many other Prime Ministers also. I have photographs of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, to Indira Gandhi, to Deva Gowda, to Manmohan Singh, to all the top politicians, all the whole spectrum of politicians associated with godmen, if they think that there is a connection of power that they have access to. And the present Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is not an exception. But one major difference I suddenly see in his statement 2 days back, that superstitions can be dangerous to anyone in this 21st century, and one should not go behind that. And he himself said that he did believe in science and technology and not in superstition. I think that's an important statement. It's a very important statement, especially when it comes from Narendra Modi. I've written articles very heavily criticizing for example, the secular policies of Narendra Modi. I've written an article, expressing my serious concern that India would go in the line of Iran and Indian secularism could be in jeopardy. I've expressed serious concern about a lot of other things in connection with secularism and the future of secularism. That's a different thing altogether. I would come to that also. But here, science versus superstition, science versus vulnerability of politicians. This is the issue that we are speaking now. Secularism is certainly, to many people connected with that, but it's certainly a different topic. Why? Because most of the people who are speaking for scientific temper and who are speaking for scientific attitude, who are for science and technology against superstitions, who fight on the front line against all these blind beliefs, are also champions of secular polity. So many people separate these two things. Secular polity as well as fight against superstitions are synonymous for many people, but it need not be. So for example, if one thinks that superstitions are to be addressed, And if one does not come to the position at the level that one would consider secularism is to be respected, still that's important and that has to be respected. To that extent, it's a big step to address superstitions and counter superstitions as against those mighty forces of the superstition empire promoters. We have astrologers, we have godmen, we have gurus, we have babas. All these people are around us. They are the spreaders of superstition in India. They are the people who give credence to superstition. Superstition is not just a kind of little vulnerability of a human being. In a country like India, that makes people fearful. They are afraid of the natural phenomena. They are afraid of everything. They are afraid of the time. They are afraid of a cat running across you is not the only thing. But if there is a little mark in front of your house, you would consider that is the presence of a ghost. People leave villages if they hear some unfamiliar sounds. People would sacrifice humans thinking that that would bring them wealth. Superstition is rampant in India. It's so deeply penetrated. It has deeply penetrated into every sector of Indian life. Therefore, any political leader, anybody with political clout, anybody who has a lot of influence on the other side, when they come out against superstition and insisting on principles of science and technology as a powerful weapon against superstition, that has to be accepted, that has to be respected, that has to be encouraged, and that has to be supported. Therefore, when a person like Narendra Modi speaks very clearly against superstitions and make joke about politicians who make superstitious decisions, he was speaking about an opposition leader in Telangana. He said there are people who make rituals and think that that will bring them luck. And there are politicians who would not visit certain constituencies because they believe that if they go to that constituency, they would lose the election. Such superstitions exist in most states. And in Gujarat also, there were such superstitions, but he did not believe in such things. And he visited constituencies which were considered dangerous by bad omen by a lot of people. And he has seen that he would win from them also there also. Very harsh attack on superstition and made joke about that. And he ridiculed the opposition leader who was, clearly superstitious. But one has to ask a question. I have a statement of Narendra Modi made some years back at a science congress. I think he was inaugurating it. And he explained there the importance of science and technology by stressing that this has a deep-rooted place in Indian polity, Indian society, Indian life, and Indian culture from a long time back. Yes, it's correct. There is science. You can see in the ancient societies everywhere, in Egypt, in China, in Babylonia, everywhere you can see, in India, everywhere, people found a lot of things in the old times. People found wheel, people studied how to calculate. They started seeing the stars, and they understand the rhythm of the movement of the objects that they see in the skies. They understood many things. They understood how to calculate the eclipses. They understood how to calculate the distances. Science was not a product of 18th century. Science has been there from the very beginning, when the first man found a wooden log, and when he understood that he can use it to cross the river. That was science. When the first man found a wheel and found that it is easy to move things with a wheel, that was the beginning of science. And when the first man used fire to keep and preserve and cook food, that was science. So science has its humble beginning in everything that we found. When human brain started understanding things, every new thing that we understood. When we first used a weapon, maybe a piece of stick, to throw on a tree to get the fruits coming down from the tree. That was science. But the growth of science was slowly, and it was not that fast as it happens now. Slowly and steadily it was growing. But came several obstacles. When science took new dimensions and new growth by our understanding growing further, there have been efforts to stop it everywhere in the world, including in India. And most of these acclaimed Indian scientific innovations in the past were ridiculed at that time. Some of the exponents of the ideas were chased away at that time. But not only in India, everywhere it was like that. But that doesn't mean that we have had all scientific knowledge that we have at this moment in the past in India or in Egypt or in Babylonia or any other places. If somebody starts claiming that the modern aeroplanes were an imitation of the ancient flying instruments that we had in the times of Purana, there is something wrong with that. Because every epic, every legend, every mythology has fantastic ideas. You look at Greek mythology, you have similar stories. You get the Egyptian, Babylonian, Roman mythology, you see flying equipments and flying people and flying, humans. All these kind of things are there. Human imagination was very fast growing, and all these stories were there. But if anybody claims that the modern knowledge is something that existed but lost, that has something seriously. That is something seriously wrong. There has been effort in India earlier times to record all information we have. For example, from 2nd century onwards, one sees a tendency to consolidate and record the knowledge that we have. But what the people of those times considered knowledge cannot be considered knowledge in all cases. For example, there is what India called the ancient way of understanding was called Shastra. That's the word that we still use for science in most of the Indian languages. The word Shastra is used, for example, how a little lizard would decide your future. There is a Gauli Shastra. That is considered a science of the past. If the lizard is making sound from your right side, it's good for you. And if the left side is bad for you, it falls on you, it's dangerous for you. There is a whole set of Shastra made out of the sounds and movements of a lizard that was in the houses. And also, what is a good omen and bad omen? There are called a lot of Shastras for that. But also there were other informations, which also one called Sutra, means the secret, or Shastra means the consolidated knowledge for many things. For example, Kama Sutra, that is a code of human sexuality's different postures. That was also informed, stored and collected, but also other things. Every kind of knowledge was taught, including Taskara Shastra, the science of stealing. That is also stored as an information. Artha Shastra, the knowledge of money, the principles of money, everything was recorded. But some societies have done it. There have been efforts to store information in many parts of Europe. In China, that was there. In Egypt, that was there. So that's nothing very special to India. But the new set of politicians who would take a lot of pride from their past than from the present would want to get a sanction of the past for everything that we do now. One would go to the extent of claiming that the nuclear bombs were known in the Ramayana's time, and the Brahmastra is actually a nuclear bomb. We don't see any evidence of any nuclear blast anywhere. If there was a nuclear attack, we can easily identify radiations, remnants even now, and there was nothing of that sort. Still, people would believe that. Also, people would say that there were flying instruments earlier. Ravana was flying on an aeroplane, Vimana. That's the word we still use for an aeroplane in India. But one should also imagine that the same way, like in Egyptian mythology, or the same way, like the mythology of Greece, the Indian flying machines also were flying with birds or with horses with wings, taking them forward. Well, there is another interesting set of knowledge about a flying instrument, Vimana Shastra, they call it. And it's explained in a way which one can understand now, that how vulnerable politicians believe those people who claim that they were the custodians of knowledge without going and verifying them. For example, Vimana Shastra speaks about the possibility of motion and elevating of an instrument by heating mercury. Will it produce any kind of energy? Will it generate energy to lift an instrument which can go up and down and left and right, or forward and backward as one wishes? Exactly as it was written in Vimana Shastra. Later, IIT students tried to replicate and produce some flying instruments, not only once, but more than once. And we found that this was absurd. So it could be proved scientifically that this so-called old science was simply a humbug and there was nothing in that. But such things are done systematically, and we are understanding that many claims that are made earlier were wrong. But, well, of course, if there was some knowledge that we did not know now, that should be accepted and taken, and that's not to be, taken as a great credit of any culture or any faith or any religion. That's there in every society. But I was speaking about the Science Congress. In a Science Congress, our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, spoke. Exact words I do not know. I mean, the content of it is as follows. He said, we had plastic surgery in ancient India. Look at the story of Ganesh, who had an elephant's head and a human body, and such things were possible in the past in India. That was an example that we had, plastic surgery. And I think some other story was mentioned that we had cloning and all these kind of things by some other people. But the whole idea is transplanting a head from an animal to human being is not what is plastic surgery is. And secondly, a mythology can be taken like science fiction. It's perfect imagination of people that can give clue to find something later. But beyond that, if one gives credence to the past with all mythological stories and try to find science in all these mythological stories, that's the biggest mistake that we can do to the promotion of science and technology. Science and technology's fundamental basis, we are speaking about evidence-based knowledge. Any kind of knowledge should be verifiable and it should be evidence-based. That's the key of scientific knowledge. All scientific innovations and all scientific achievements are based on verifiable evidence-based methods. Otherwise, you cannot reach out things. Any information that is produced by anybody, any innovation that you make, any discovery you make, any invention you make, that has to be verifiable. That has to be checked, and that has to be understood by people. The method should be known to people. That is how things work. So that's the key of science and technology. That's the key of the principles of science and technology. But not only that, we now know that there are further patterns that are important. More than evidence, what is important is falsifiability. Means any kind of principle that one brings out in science or application technology, it should be questionable by other principles. You should be able to put challenges against that, and all the challenges, the technical and challenges, should be falsified. There cannot be inexplicable other ways for handling it. So all questions, counter questions and inquiries critical of that should be falsified. Without that, you cannot come to a perfect conclusion of a scientific principle. That's the key of scientific knowledge. So I would not say that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is ignorant of all these kind of things. He is well aware about all these kind of things. But to my understanding, as a political science student, he would be seeing or understanding a political support base that he has from those people who would cherish the past of India. And many politicians would try to use every kind of support base that they have. And he certainly encourages that like a politician, and he would try to find credence from that, or he tried to get support from that. But all the same, deeper somewhere, there may be an understanding that one has to stress on science and technology, and one has to reject all these superstitions. And now time has come that he has reached a position that he could reject superstitions openly and with a stable voice, and to speak for science and technology. And if that is a genuine shift of focus and a genuine change of mind about his public policy on science and technology and superstition, I would like to appreciate it without any hesitation. Because I would not dig up people's past statements or past positions when they make appreciable positions at this moment. One has to live this moment, not in the past. When Indian Prime Minister publicly denounces superstition and stresses on the importance of science and technology, that has to be taken in the right spirit of it. And that will give a signal to all those people around him, at least some of them who would promote superstitions without any hesitation, to bring their point of glorified past. We have to live in the glory of the present, not in the glory of the past. We have to live in the success of today, not in some victories of the past. Today is the reality, and yesterday is for us to study only. When we understand today as what it is now, and address the problems here and now, and face it with the scientific tools and technology, then we are taking the right step forward. If that is the meaning of the recent position that the Prime Minister has taken, that has a serious implication in India's future. Because I was getting personally, like many other people, many of my colleagues were getting more and more sensitive about the set of people who would go out and speak unjustifiable claims in the name of science. Pseudoscience was getting a lot of credence all around India. Researchers to prove something that would be satisfying the idea of the past glory was being promoted. And such things were getting too much importance. Of course, such things happened earlier also, but it was getting too much stress and too much importance, and it was going in a wrong direction, which was actually taking India a little backward at one side. And this is the right moment and the right time that the Indian Prime Minister comes out openly to make a harsh criticism on superstition and make a shift change, a policy change, and that is wholeheartedly welcomed by the people who think that today is important than yesterday, and the changes that happen today can influence tomorrow, and that's a right step forward. Thank you very much.
Hi, Sanal, how are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, fine, perfectly fine. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm still skeptical about this statement from Modi about superstition, because I still think the present BJP government is quite involved with Hindutva and taking religion as a basis. I think religion itself is quite superstitious, as far as I'm concerned, And I think most of the things they do in India, I mean, at the moment, is still, involves religion into it. And when you start involving religion into it, I think so you can't get rid of superstitions, to be honest with you. Most of the points you have made, that they will use Ganesha to start anything or whatever. I'm a bit skeptical about the whole thing. I'm afraid I'm not that optimistic as you are at this stage. I mean, I did see this morning when you said that Modi made this statement, and I thought it's very unlikely that I still think they're quite superstitious people. That's my point of view, anyway. But anyway, you had a good talk. I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to see the whole thing with a clear separation between, secularism is one issue. The issue of religion interfering into the political scene and bringing religious ideas into politics is one front of fight which the rationalists are doing. But the fight against superstition is another front. These are two different fronts. But most of the time we confuse these and consider these two as the same thing. The fight for secularism, the fight against superstition are not the one fight. These are two different fights. But most of us are doing both. Therefore, we would think normally that if one takes one position on the superstition front, that would guarantee that he should take the other position on secularism also. And if one is a secularist, he should be out of superstition. I mean, this could be, confusing, for many people I know, but I would like to see the difference very, very clearly. And also, the most important thing that I see on the front of secularism, which is another serious concern we all have, and which I understand, which is your concern also. I have serious concerns on the front of secularism, but this is not a problem this moment only. From quite some years, not even before BJP coming to power, I had this serious concern about the future of secularism, because most of Indian politicians tried to interpret secularism in a very different way, and they tried to use it against the popular words that we normally use for pluralism. So existence of different faiths without any fear of persecution was presented as secularism, which is very clearly, secularism means only one thing, the clear separation of state and religion. So that was one thing which was always worrying me in the Indian polity. But coming to the secular credentials of our political system altogether now, what I'm worrying is, which political party in the ruling party, of course, we know that they are going more and more to the Hindu side, which can also get into a very dangerous level if it goes unstopped by like this. But on the other side, many leaders of opposition are trying to catch the bus of Hindutva, and they would like to be better Hindu than the Hindu party. That's a wrong signal altogether. I still remember the first speech of the present Prime Minister when he was elected the second time. And in his speech to the nation, he said one major point, which was shocking to me. I myself thought of it that moment only. He said in the first election that he contested, the major plank, the political plank that was against him was from the secular plank. Every major national political party on the opposition was accusing him of on the plank of secularism. But in the second election, no single opposition party took secularism as a political issue in the election. That's what he himself said. That was their narrative did not have secularism in the second election. And that's what he says. What does that mean? It's correct also. I looked at that. No single political party in the last election took secularism as a major issue of their fight. Many of them tried to fight on the same ground. For example, people like Rahul Gandhi, whom one would expect from Congress party, which was, standing for secularism, at least officially, trying to present him as more a Hindu, and was speaking about his faith in Shiva, which was unnecessary in a political campaign, to give an impression that he is more faithful than the other faithful people. So this is one thing that has been seriously affecting the whole idea of secularism, because there is no secular alternative. To address the secular issue, what I feel is that those people who understand the importance of secularism should speak the language of secularism, should speak the importance of the separation of state and religion. And they should speak very clearly against the influence of religion in the political scene. Rather, they try to compromise on that point, which will give it easy. For example, when the opposition leaders try to be more Hindu than the Hindutva party, I mean, they would try to, I mean, they don't want to lose the Hindu support or Hindutva support on one side. They would become more and more on that side only. But if they raise secular issues and insist on secularism, that would give a pressure on the present government to present themselves as at least cosmetically secular. So there is a serious issue concerning secularism, and the secular challenges are very important. I think that the whole public opinion raising up should force the present ruling party to understand the importance of the big challenge that India is facing because of the conflicts that are emerging in different parts of the country on the basis of the communal debate, that they take a path of more understanding and understanding the Indian society as a plural society and coexistence of people without conflict as an important political position. So, or if they go under the influence of the radical forces, there are forces which are very radically right on the other side, which is influencing. I think the present day government is between two forces, the radical right pulling them to the right at one side, or the pressure of secularism or pressure of criticism that they are not secular on the other side, and which way they will turn. There also, history makes turn points. And if the turn point goes to the far right, and that will be detrimental to India, in my view. And if it goes with the influence of the opposition and other critics, if it goes towards a line of more tolerance, that will be good for India. But fighting superstition is another platform, another front. The secularists are there, but not only secularists are there, but even religious leaders are there sometimes who are fighting against superstition. And also, if you say that belief in God is the only superstition, and that's the key superstition, well, I would differ with that. That's one major superstition that keeps religions, but superstition has a wide spectrum, and we have to address it at different levels, at different ways, in different patterns. So we have to go ahead forward, and I would like to be, positive. I would like to be optimistic, as you say. But yes, I have a very clear skeptical mind on the other side. I watch carefully, and if it's just a cosmetic thing to address a special situation only, I would be the first person coming out against that also. And if this goes in this direction, more and more towards science and technology and against superstition, and eventually on the front of secularism also, if there are modifications, I would not criticize a government for what they have done in the past, but I would try to see what they're doing this moment or tomorrow.
To be honest with you, I think if someone is superstitious, it's harmless. It doesn't bother anybody. If somebody wants to carry a charm, it's up to him or her. It doesn't harm anybody being a superstitious, but I think it does harm when you have a belief which is anti-humanist. As a humanist, I always look everybody as the same. To me, all humans are the same. It doesn't make a difference what if somebody wants to believe. If the cat crosses the road, he should wait or something or whatever. That doesn't bother me. It's harmless. It's just it's like a ritual. People, if you sneeze, you stop, don't move, just wait for some time. And then, it doesn't bother me at all. I'll be very honest with you. Superstition doesn't bother me at all. People have superstitious feeling, good to them, But it's when it's impacting, when you have some action which impact on other people's, then that bothers me. When you do something which affects somebody else, that really bothers me. And I'm against that totally, But if somebody wants to keep a superstition mind, that's up to them, So long as not affecting somebody else.
I have a totally different view on the whole thing, because superstition is not just a cat crossing your road or you go for a charm. That's not only superstition. For example, in superstition, what we understand in India, 13% of the Indian population believe in witchcraft. They are willing to sacrifice not only animals, but also their children. There are more than 800 human sacrifices happening in India, which was reported in British newspapers as well. The largest number of people killed as witches, even now in the whole world, is in India. Every year, more than 2,000 people are killed practically as witches in India. And the number of hours that people waste just because they believe in the auspicious hour and inauspicious hour, and the number of contracts that are not happening because of the belief in astrology, these all have very serious impact. There are different levels of superstition. That's what I was trying to focus. There are minor superstitions which are not damaging the individual. You are mentioning about that. But you are living in UK, and the ground realities in Indian villages are much, much different. A lot of people are living in perpetual fear. And they don't, for example, they fear against modern medicine, for example. And more than 25% of the Indian population refuses to take modern medicine because they're afraid that these modern medicines are dangerous. They believe in some kind of unverifiable medicines everywhere. They go to their Oja. They go to the local magical practitioner. Tuberculosis is coming back in India in a very big way. And 90% of the tuberculosis patients in villages do not take any medicine for that. They go for other supports which are not scientifically sanctioned. So superstition is not only a cat crossing, but when people refuse to take a medicine because they believe that something else would work, when people would refuse to go in the right direction of things, but because they believe in some other things are happening, if they do it, they live in fear. They are willing to sacrifice anything to ward off this fear. And the amount of belief in witchcraft in the Indian rural village is the largest in the world, but for the Central African countries. That's the heaviest in the whole world. So witchcraft, magical thinking, and refusing modern medicines, to begin with, the Indian villages are infested with the life-threatening superstitions. That is what we have been fighting against also. So we very clearly differentiate the minor superstitions that the urban, westernized people have, like looking at the astrology and making a small laugh, or a cat is crossing and you laugh at it or you believe in it. Sneezing, no, that's not what we are speaking about. But people who are going to witchcraft against their ailments and not going to hospital, but doing a ritual for that. That's what I'm speaking about. People who refuse to take a surgery because the astrologer said you should not do it. People believe that their ailment is coming from the past life because an astrologer said it. More than 14% of the Indian population, there's a survey, who believe that their ailments are because they have done something in the past life. Therefore, they have to suffer it. So that is the kind of medical illiteracy, the kind of psychological illiteracy. And for example, normal ailments like schizophrenia is taken as demons and spirits. And to what extent these superstitions would go? We have examples that scientists of Indian Space Research Organization consulting astrologers for auspicious time to launch a satellite, or taking the replica. Well, that also one can say that it doesn't make any difference. Well, if it takes a replica to a temple and make a prayer, it doesn't make any difference. It makes a difference because it influences a whole society and they would lose their faith in science and technology. Therefore, superstition is not a cat crossing across the road. Superstition is when you take a knife and willing to kill your own son or daughter to get a hidden wealth somewhere, and many people are still doing. More than 200 human sacrifices happen in India. And as I told you, 800 people are on a year killed every year thinking that they are witches. And all this, and witchcraft is so rampant in India, and to the extent which is not reported, the number of missing children in northern India, especially in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, are clearly connected to abducting little children to use their internal organs to do black magic for the wealth accumulation of businessmen. They think that there is a witchcraft where the internal organs of children under the age of 12 are to be used in certain black magic. That's very clearly connected with the number of missing children in many parts of India. So superstition is life-threatening and very dangerous in many parts of India. And that is what is to be addressed with the understanding of science and technology. That is what I'm speaking about, not the superstition about sneezing. So that is an important thing, which is also, I mean, I don't say that the question of secularism is important. It is important, certainly. That's fought at a different front. But fighting these superstitions, life-threatening superstitions, that's how we call it. The normally superstitions that are not dangerous, which can be taken as a light heart or a light laugher, is one thing. But there are so many superstitions that are life-threatening, and that can go deep into more and more communities. If you remember, I had once a television program where somebody promised that he would kill me with a black magic, which he claimed. And after that program only, I realized that, I mean, with the number of calls I was getting, thousands practically, people who were relieved because they believed that somebody could do a black magic. They were afraid about that. And people do practice black magic. In Delhi alone, India's capital, there are more than 700 black magic practitioners officially doing their work. And police has a report about that. When I was still in India, and I was part of that discussion, how to handle it, 700 people officially practice Tantric Vidya in Delhi alone. And Mumbai also has a figure like that. And who are the people going to these people? And what are they doing? Most of these witchcraft includes violence and crime. And that is what I mean by superstition, the dangerous, life-threatening superstition. That is what is addressed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanal sir. That was a wonderful talk. It showed how past biases should not cloud your clear, rational analysis of a current issue. My question is something hypothetical. You can see like Narendra Modi one day going to Varanasi and doing Aarti in the Ganga, and another day you can see him giving a lecture about science and how you should reject superstition. My question is like this: if you tomorrow wake up in Narendra Modi's body, and you have a 50-year timeline to transform India into a modern society with less superstition and 1.4 billion people having scientific temper. And at the same time, you have to maintain your public support to maintain the power. Would you be behaving differently? It's a hypothetical question.
Saju, that's a good question, actually. And in fact, I would like to address that question because it answers a kind of unclear point that I've been speaking. For example, Narendra Modi has been photographed in a cave in saffron clothes during the last election. He has been making arati in river Ganges, and he has been taking holy dip during the Kumbh Mela. So these are ritualistic, very closely connected with superstitious beliefs. Most of these rituals are connected with kind of unsubstantiated beliefs. When one practices these kind of things, how would you speak against superstition? I mean, what would be the compulsions these people are in when they go for such thing? It's a good question. The answer is as follows. If I were in his position, I would not do such a thing. I would stand very clearly with my commitment. I would not work under any political compulsions. But politicians are under compulsions. It's a ground reality. We have seen similar things, not only from, of course, one focuses it and one sees it more when Narendra Modi does it. But when Priyanka Gandhi does the same thing, holding a Kali's sword and covering her body with all these kind of garlands and sit like a goddess, we don't feel it the same way. Why? Because the politics that Priyanka Gandhi represents, one considers is secular, and what Narendra Modi represents is not secular, is the public understanding. So we would feel it more sensitive when Narendra Modi does. But imagine, I still remember, and I've written even an article long back, Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. And Sonia Gandhi, the then leader of the ruling party, going to Ganges and initiating a function which was throwing 1,000 liters of milk poured into river Ganges as part of a great ritual. And that was celebrated as a great thing by a lot of people. Why? Because she was with a Roman Catholic background and coming to India and doing a Hindu ritual. But also, and why did she do it? She was very clearly trying to overcome a handicap that she has. Because she would be seen as a foreigner, a person with foreign origin in a country with a different faith by the majority of the people. And she would want to be the custodian of that faith to win these people. This is a political compulsion of a leader. So I would, as a rationalist, criticize it. But as a political scientist, understanding how the mechanism of leadership and their compulsions, internal compulsions, as well as their strategic compulsions would force them, I would try to understand it based on the political compulsions they are in. These are two different things again. So I would advocate a political situation where politicians are able to handle this crisis and without getting influenced by these compulsions, take very clear decisions and are in a position to justify it and speak very clearly with their conscience. Many politicians who otherwise do not believe in any kind of rituals, I have seen some of the politicians I know personally who do not believe in any kind of rituals, which they have privately told me, but I've seen them in the public stage doing rituals to satisfy the political requirement. For expediency, they simply go ahead with the way it is presented to them or their advisors telling them to do. This is, I would say, unethical political method. The right way of doing things is that, a political leader, if one represents a nation especially, or a major political party, they should be able to identify the difference between public display of faith and private faith. If a political leader is a person of faith, I don't have any problem. Because I don't insist that everybody would have my personal views about religion. A religious person also can be in politics, certainly. And he or she can have one's own faith. But that should be a private affair. One should not bring it into the political arena or use a public ritual to win political support with that. That is unethical. It's wrong. And if it is done by Sonia Gandhi, it's wrong. If it's done by Narendra Modi, it's wrong. If it's done by the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, anybody does, it's wrong. This is more important than a superstitious Devagowda calling a Vastu expert and taking money from the government, changing the doors and windows and toilets of the Prime Minister's house. Of course, that's government is losing some money. It's a private faith of a person only. But a public display of something that is not correct to his actual belief, done to actually eyewash the people who are in the faith, thinking that that would bring political support, is a wrong political method, in my view. I would not do it if I were in that position. But many politicians do that, and whomsoever is doing is not doing it correctly. And therefore, I would say that if Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to do a prayer, wants to do a religious ritual, well, he is welcome to do that, but he should not mix up that with the political life. He should not do it as a Prime Minister. He should do it as the individual Narendra Modi. That's the difference. This fine difference is not understood in India so well. People have their private faith and they can maintain that. But in public life, you are not supposed to bring your faith. And that should be clearly secular, and it should be beyond any kind of special faith's influence. Will that clear your position?
Yes, partially. But if Radish has to ask any question, I can wait, or can I follow up?
Please, if you have an additional question, okay. Yes, welcome.
Yeah, so I will tell you an incident I heard somewhere that there was a place in Kerala where people were offering animal sacrifices to goddess Kali. And one Swami came there and he saw this, and then he wanted to stop it. So what he did is he told the people that the goddess would accept red flowers and kumkum instead of this animal sacrifice, and that is enough. So people stopped the animal sacrifice, and instead they started offering flowers and kumkum. But he did not ask them to stop the ritual. Don't you think this kind of graded approach is better than if he would have said, okay, all your practices are stupid, stop everything?
In fact, Saju, that is using the method of appeal to authority instead of appeal to reason. So he is using his authority as a religious leader, and people have faith in him, and he tries to present it. He has an idea in his mind that things should change. So he knows that this has no meaning. So he uses his authority as a religious leader to present them a story that could appeal to them. The appeal to authority is used very clearly, and he tries to convince them by telling something that is, his objective to achieve. So he has a different objective to achieve it, but he uses a method that is appeal to authority. But I would say that instead, we could use the influence of reason to change. That is more valuable. Because if he says, as his authority is used there as a religious leader, this is, well, you can use red flowers, and that is also equally satisfying the gods. He's a powerful religious leader. People believe it. They've gone to his authoritative position, agreed. But another religious leader comes whom they consider who has more authority, and they would revere more. Then if the same principle is used, he would use, for example, he would think that no, a red flower is not enough, but real sacrifice is important. He would say that his interpretation is wrong. I am more correct. He is more respected as a religious leader. So his authority will be used or can be used to counter it. But when reason is used, when you are thinking, that's the difference. When you use authority to convince people the way you want, it can work at that time, but it can be rectified, it can be modified, it can be reversed by another person who has more appeal to them as a person of authority. So that may not be sustainable. That is why, for example, some people, for example, would say, instead of sacrificing a goat in the Vedic ritual, you can cut a big cucumber. But there are other people who come and say that, no, you cannot do that. Look at the original text, it speaks in a different way. So the appeal to authority will work only when you have an authority. And it can be changed or altered with another person who would go for the appeal to the scripture, for example. So they would bring a scripture to appeal them. Or they would bring another person who has more power or more authority than this person. But if the method of reason is used, that cannot be reversed, because that reason is not used by the person who is telling it. He is only showing the way. Reason is used by the person who is at the other end. His own reasoning is used. That is invoked, and that will be sustainable.
So my question is that you guys spoke about Modi, Priyanka Gandhi, all those people. When they do the superstitions, even the HGBR or the Quran, when they do the superstition, they call it as either it's scientific or their rituals or faith. The same thing someone else do, it's a superstition or pseudoscience or something. So it's just a time being this thing, sir. And there is no issue now. The body has said it's some scientific outlook and all, but still there is no change in amendment or anything as brought into Indian Constitution or anything. It's all remains same. So as a rationalist, should we take it as a sensible, or how's your opinion, sir?
Well, see, this was the first time I hear a position like this from the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That's why I thought about that, and I was very skeptical about it first. But eventually, I was coming out with a very clear opinion. I was very clear in my mind that if anybody who wants to take a position that is different than he is at least supposedly known to be, taking earlier, which is in the right direction, one should not hesitate to appreciate it. And I felt if this means something serious, that's to be respected and that's to be accepted, and that has to be encouraged, because that would give a kind of confidence to a lot of people in his camp to come out against superstition. Because I know a lot of people who are in his political camp who are not very superstitious, like some other people are. So therefore, it may encourage a lot of people. So for example, in the BJP camp, at least some people whom I know very personally, Arun Shourie, he is a very clear atheist. He doesn't have any of these superstitions in my view. But he is in the political camp of BJP. So there are many people like that. If these people like him at the secondary level or at the cadre level, there are many people who are not very superstitious, but who cannot speak out because they don't want to go against the political flow. They all will get now strength when their leader openly speaks against superstition. So that will have an impact which is positive. And that's to be encouraged, not simply denounced because he has said something, not acceptable in the past. And that's why I said all politicians that I know, in the near future, most of them have tried to appease religions, appease rituals, and go along with all these kind of superstitions because they thought it was expedient, it was convenient, and that would bring more political clout. A person who has enormous political clout only can take the liberty to go against the flow that goes on. So if Modi thinks that he has enough political clout to speak against superstitions, that should be welcomed. And if he speaks about superstitions in the language that he's spoken now, again and again, that will give strength to a lot of people in his political camp, which is the majority political position in the country. The majority of the people, at least he has a huge support in the country, and there are a lot of people in his political party. And if at least some of them get courage to come out against superstition, that would be a positive step. Why should one see always in negative frame alone? And will he change a constitutional, the constitution, or make an amendment to make it better to fight against superstitions? That's the question you ask. Well, in the Indian constitution, we have a very good position in the fundamental duties, which asks very clearly for promoting scientific attitude, scientific temper, spirit of inquiry, and spirit of reform. That's a fundamental duty. What do we want more than that? Spirit of humanism also is very clearly mentioned there. I don't think any other constitution in the whole world would speak this clearly against the traditional attitude, because it asks for spirit of reform also as part of the fundamental duty of all citizens. And if one takes this as a fundamental idea, and if a prime minister or a political leader who could stress on this point, that will encourage a lot of people, give strength to a lot of people.
Hello, sir. Can I add on?
Yes.
Sir, there is a blasphemy law also. We have our law as blasphemy law also. So because of
Yes.
So the constitution has both said yes.
The blasphemy law is not in the constitution. It's in the Indian criminal laws.
Yeah, okay, yes, sorry, yeah.
Just mute for a minute, otherwise it's a coin. Yeah. So the criminal laws are coming from the past, from 1800s. 1800s, the then British authorities have made the Indian criminal laws and the civil laws. And when India got independence in 1947, we have followed these criminal laws as it is. And the only thing that we have agreed at that time is that if anything is violative of the Indian constitution's guaranteed fundamental rights, that law become null and void. So we didn't have a new set of laws. We only made some new set of acts which were added to the ancient old laws. But there is no new criminal laws in India. But in fact, this calls for a total revision of Indian criminal laws, Maybe one has to make a new Indian criminal laws by decriminalizing a lot of unnecessary things. Yesterday I've been speaking about the decriminalization of prostitution, for example. We have decriminalized homosexuality. There were laws which are very harsh against, for example, gays in Indian penal laws. So many things have to be modified. So that's another process that we have to go through. And Indian criminal laws are to be corrected, modified, and it should be humane and it should be fitting to a modern world. Certainly, I would agree that point.
Okay, thank you, sir.
There should be an initiative in that direction also. Thank you very much. And we end this meeting now.